Welcome to our program. It's going to discuss art and the life of Vincent Van Gogh. Van Gogh is among the most famous of the fine artists internationally that we have. His art is remarkable for a number of reasons, many of which I'll be discussing a little later in the program. However, his life is in many ways more remarkable than the art that he produced. But maybe we can't separate the two. He believed deeply that his paintings, when he produced them, they were reflecting the emotions that he was feeling at the time. And those emotions were reflecting what he was going through at the time. Vincent went through quite a lot. He believed that a painter's life is expressed in each work that he produces. He said this, "What lives in art and is eternally living is first of all the painter and then the painting." You know, if what he says is true, then really almost all of us have the potential of becoming artists and producing art in one form or another. Children, if you think about them, if you've been around little bitty kids, one of the first things that they love to do is draw. And then a little later, they'll color what they've drawn. And if you think about it, one of the first things that we teach them is to color within the lines. Vincent tried that at the beginning of his career, but he made his fortune after death by not coloring in the lines. He broke the rules that we impose on our children. You know, when I was a child, I loved to draw. I did paint by number things. I had all that sort of thing going. And I learned from those things two things. First of all, art is complex. And so to produce art takes skill. And the second thing that I learned is that there's great joy in creating art, again, in whatever form. A lot of my family members, current and previous, inherited a kind of lovely talent for art. I did not. I'm the one who tries to paint with words. That's the best I can do. What about you? What's your story? Do you paint? Do you draw? If you do, why do you do it? Is it for personal pleasure? Or perhaps you're a professional artist? If you don't, would you like to try? You're never too young nor too old to give it a go. Van Gogh didn't begin painting until he was 27 years old. He'd gone through several careers before he went with his heart and with his brother's advice and took painting. Those early works of his were done in black and white. Even at 27, he's just beginning. He's just learning. He's often using just plain white paper and a simple graphite pencil. Think children. As he grew better at drawing with pencils, he added pens and then later watercolors and then finally oil on canvas. Perhaps you're doodling with pencils or pens. Maybe you're drawing something. No matter your age, pursue it if it gives you pleasure. Van Gogh said, "I dream of painting, and then I paint my dream." To get a handle on Van Gogh's life and Van Gogh's art, I selected two books, both of which I want to recommend to you today. The first, Van Gogh, The Life. It's co-authored by Stephen Nafa and Gregory White Smith, published by Random House in New York, and it was published in 2012. It was a New York Times bestseller. These authors have previously won Pulitzer Prizes for their work. And what I discovered in this biography was that the quality of the research to get to the truth about the person behind the stories is evident in this one. They were wonderful at their research. The book is extensively documented, so it's got footnotes, it's got back notes. So as you read it, if you're interested, you can actually see where they found the information. They had extraordinary access to Van Gogh's papers, and that, combined with their gift for telling a good story, make this book the biography of Vincent van Gogh. I recommend it highly. The second book is really more a picture book. It's called Vincent Van Gogh, His Life in Art, edited by David Bamford, published by the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and it was published in 2019. Both of these books have wonderful illustrations of Van Gogh's work, from his drawing through his great paintings. Van Gogh, his life in art, though, is simply spectacular in showcasing his work. Beautiful color. This book is a collection of articles written by a team of international experts on Van Gogh and on Van Gogh's art. It traces his development from drawing techniques and then drawing landscapes and then to the oil on canvas portraits and some of his still lifes. This book is also readable because the essays, these individual essays, most of them are relatively short, and they're focused on one aspect of either his life or his art. So the reader can pick and choose which thing interests him the most. I recommend this book highly as well. Let's take a look at Vincent. He was age 19 when this picture was taken. It was taken in 1873. It's now part of the copyrighted materials of the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. There are very few photographs of Vincent in existence, and there are a world of fake ones. I warn you ahead of time, if you decide to go and look a little bit research on your own and you look for images of Van Gogh, you're going to see all kinds of things. Don't believe what you're seeing. This one, though, is real. It's authenticated. Look at it very closely. Vincent is obviously a very serious-minded person. In truth, he was a very serious child and a very serious adult. Now take a look at this painting. It shows Vincent 16 years later. It's a self-portrait. He painted what he looked like. He painted it in September of 1889. It now is at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. They acquired it in 1986. It's quite an interesting portrait, but it's only one of 43 self-portraits that Van Gogh painted. He was too poor to pay for models, and so he often used himself as a model, and he used occasionally a family member as a model. Sometimes it would be a friend who would agree to just sit for him and let him do it. One of the things you may have heard about Van Gogh is that he suffered from some sort of mental illness. Scholars differ on exactly what made Van Gogh so different. He lived his life according to his own terms, some of which were expected, some of which were quite surprising. The question is, why did he make the choices that he made? Scholars have come down to these possible factors that may have caused some of his behaviors. First of all, he suffered from lifelong chronic depression, and there's plenty of evidence that this may have been inherited. He has other family members who have different degrees of mental problems of that kind. Others suggest that maybe in addition to that, there was possibly a learning disability. He had a difficult childhood. They were not wealthy. They were, as a family, different from most of the people around them because of their father's vocation. He had a pretty challenging dynamic within that core family, mother, father, brothers, and sisters. They were taught to stay together, that together they were more important than anything outside. And then the thing that I think was the biggest cause for his unusual behaviors, He had a brilliant mind, and it was combined with exquisite talent. In other words, Van Gogh was an artistic genius. The truth is, all of these possible causes are valid. The scholars are spot on. His life experiences and the emotions that they caused are clearly expressed in his paintings, if you can put his biography next to the work that he's painting at that time. Let's take a look first, though, at his life so we can interpret those paintings. Van Gogh said once, "Great things are done by a series of small things brought together." Van Gogh's life was made up by a series of small things that came together, both to nurture him and to torture him. Those small things turned out to be not small at all. This is a picture of his house. It's in Brabant. The blue arrow gives you clear pointing to it. He didn't have an easy childhood, but he did have a secure one. So secure that he repeatedly returned to live at home with his parents long after he was an adult. He was born in 1853 in Zundert in the Netherlands. He's a Dutchman. It's a small country village in the Dutch province of North Brabant. The village was a very peaceful place, and the Van Gogh family made a habit of walking together as a family through the area, especially that just outside of the village where they could get out in nature. This was the way the parents tried to instill a love of nature into their children. It definitely worked with Vincent. He lived, though, in his life, relatively short life. He only lived to 37. He lived in a number of places. Some were with his parents, some were not with his parents. Occasionally he would be able to be on his own, but then he would come back to them. He loved the Netherlands, and he left it because he needed a more sophisticated art community to join. If he were to be an artist, he had to have contact with other artists. And to find that, he finally found France. He said once, "If you truly love nature, you will find beauty everywhere." And in Vincent's life, he did find beauty, often in places that others would not bother to look. Among those small things that came together to both comfort and torture Vincent were his parents. They were devoted to each other, and they were devoted to their children, and they placed major emphasis on the importance of family. And together they created a cocoon for their children that kept them together as a family, certainly, but it sort of set them apart from the outside world. Let's look at those parents. This is Anna Cornelia Carbentus. This is the woman who was to become Vincent's mother. She was born in 1819. She passed away in 1907. She married Theodorus Van Gogh in 1851. She was talented in drawing, and she encouraged Vincent to love art, and she always supported his work. Take a look at this. He actually did a painting of his mother from a photograph that he had. Some scholars believe that Anna's early work with her children, teaching them to draw and to color, were important for all of them, but none so much as Vincent. He was devoted to her. He had this photograph of her, but he thought of her in color. And so in a letter to his brother Theo, he said, "I've decided to paint a portrait of her in the colors that I see her in my memory." This is what he wrote, quote, "I'm doing a portrait of Mother for myself. I cannot stand the colorless photograph and am trying to do one in harmony of color as I see her in my memory." His father was Theodorus Van Gogh, born in 1822, passed away in 1885. Protestant clergyman of the Dutch Reformed Church. Together, he and Anna had 7 children, 4 sons, and 3 daughters. He was clearly the head of the family, and as the preacher in the small village, he was well thought of and he was well known. But as a Protestant in a largely Catholic country, Theodorus often found it necessary to make opportunities that would draw attention to his church and to his family. The children respected their father and they loved their mother. She spent more time with them than their often austere father would. Here are the children. Please pay close attention to the first 2. March 30th, 1852, Vincent Van Gogh is born, stillborn. Exactly 1 year later to the date, Vincent Van Gogh, their eldest living son, is born. This is our painter. 1855, Anna is born. She's the eldest daughter. Then 1857, Theodorus, second living son. We'll know him as Theo. 1859, Elizabeth, the second daughter, is born. In 1862, Wilhelmina, the third daughter, is born. And then in 1867, Cornelius, the third son, is born. I'd say it's pretty unusual to have 2 children born on exactly the same day, 1 year apart, one stillborn, one healthy. I'm not sure what the shadow of that stillborn brother on the same birthday had on Vincent, but I would bet it was a contributor to some of his issues. Another of the small things that together brought Vincent comfort and torture were struggles at school. His education's remarkably limited. He attended the little village school until he was 7, as all the little children did. But in 64, his family transferred him to a boarding school. It was at Zevenbergen. It was a terribly unhappy time for Vincent, although he struggled and he managed to complete his elementary school work there. One of the reasons it was unhappy was because he was away from that cocoon family. He wasn't where he had been taught he needed to be. At age 13, he went to secondary school at Tilburg. Here he had a little bit better success. He made pretty good grades, and he was especially good with languages. Halfway through his second year, though, he just quit and walked home. He was through with school. In a family that valued education highly, it's surprising that Vincent just quit. Some scholars see patterns in his academic work that suggest dyslexia as a probable cause of why he had so much difficulty. Boarding school also separated him from that family, the core of his existence as he had been taught. His parents and his brothers and his sisters were his world, and suddenly he was no longer a part of home. The Jean Prouvilli boarding school for boys in Zevenbergen was where he spent those days, those unhappy days. As you might imagine, in a family that was so focused on the core family, the Van Goghs had a career path carved out for Vincent. He was going to be an art dealer. This would keep him close to the art world, which was an important social place to be, while it would also educate him a little bit more. It would give him that additional education through experience that he somehow could not get in books. I love this. This is an advertisement for a very, very fine company for which he went to work. At 16, he became a trainee, and he was assigned to the Goupil and Company branch in The Hague. Now, The Hague is the center of the universe in the Netherlands, so he's going from a little country rural town to the big city. In 1873, his brother Theo also got a job at Goupil's, and this was at their Brussels branch. Vincent was transferred at that point to Goupil's London branch. And then 2 years later, he was transferred to Goupil's Paris branch. So this gives Vincent not only an education as to art as it's happening in The Hague and it's happening in London and it's happening in Paris, but it also gives him a chance to try out his languages a little bit. And it also gives him a chance to see something of the real world separate from a small Dutch country village. After he moved to Paris, Vincent had had it with trying to be a professional art dealer. He had seen the world and he was going to do something different. What he decided to do, though, was a surprise to scholars, a surprise to his parents, and a surprise, frankly, to me when I read it. He's seen the lights of Paris, and he decides that he's going to devote his life to church work, ministering for the poor, like his father. His plan was to spend his life, the remainder of his life, doing good works among people who had very, very little. His parents approved of his decision. You can imagine his father's pride. And they paid for several courses that were necessary for him to become, what would you say, a certified Protestant reformer preacher. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't study. So instead of it, he abandoned the books, which had always been his enemy, and he became a lay preacher. He developed a lay preacher ministry with miners working in Baranage, Belgium. Here are 3 paintings that he did, drawings and paintings. His close association with the peasant miners and with them, the peasant families, were to inform his art later when he turned to art as a career. Here you see one where it's a fellow who's been shoveling coal mining. And then you have in the center 2 young men who are tilling the soil. And then finally, in the final drawing, you have a young woman, older woman rather, who's probably digging potatoes. Van Gogh said, "The best way to know God is to love many things." And that, of course, included the peasants. After he worked with the peasants and frankly was fired from his position, he finally agreed to listen to his brother Theo, who had been insisting for some time that Vincent focus on a career as an artist. Brother Theo was well on his way to having a successful career as an art dealer, which put him in a great position. He could buy some of Vincent's works, for example, and he also could become Vincent's primary source of financial support for the remainder of Vincent's life. Because Theo was the primary financial support, he also had a closer relationship with Theo and Vincent together. Their relationship was closer than Vincent had with any of the other of his siblings. Vincent was frankly quite doubtful that he would be able to make a career as an artist, but Theo was just as certain that Vincent had the talent and he could do it. Their parents, not surprisingly, were even more skeptical than Vincent was about his future. And so at age 27, Vincent began in earnest to teach himself how to draw. Through a lot of practice, he taught himself to master perspective, anatomy, and shading. His goal was to become a master drawer of figures. You can see here those hands and the one picture of the man digging into the soil. And he's really learning what the hands look like. Over the next several years, he lived at home with his parents, although there were short periods when he managed to move out temporarily. In 1884, he was so focused on drawing and painting of the weathered hands, the heads, the anatomical features of the poor peasants that he had so loved. The following year, he produced a painting, and his hope was that this would give him respect in the artist community. The name of it is The Potato Heaters. Today, it's located in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and my family and I have been able to see it in person. The painting is very dark because peasant houses would have been very dark. There's not money for lots of candles or whatever. They're poor. The peasant family sitting around the table, they're having a meal of potatoes. That's the staple food for the poor. The peasants' faces show the wear and premature aging that are consistent with lives where hard physical labor, too little food, and harsh conditions overall exist. This painting became one of his most famous, but not during his lifetime. When he first painted it, the art community took virtually no notice, the public saying. Vincent decided with this kind of rejection, but still with the thought he had some talent, he decided to take serious art lessons for the first time in his life. And so he went to an art academy in Antwerp, in Belgium. 3 months there. He encountered Japanese art there, and he also discovered the art of Peter Paul Rubens. Both would impact his growth as an artist. He moved to Paris and discovered Impressionists and Post-Impressionists. It was the Japanese art, though, that first intrigued him. He ultimately painted a piece of art in the style of the Japanese. This one was painted in 1887. It's entitled The Courtesan. And in Antwerp, he acquired several Japanese prints because he just thought they were interesting. But when he moved to Paris, he became more intrigued by them because they were extremely popular in the Paris art circles. So he decided better pay attention to it. And this is an oil on canvas, which is really quite beautiful. In Paris, Vincent knew artists Paul Gauguin and Claude Monet, among others. In 1888, he had a dream. He moved to the south of France to Arles, where he hoped that his artist friends would move with him and establish a school of art and an art colony there. Only Gauguin followed him. Vincent began painting sunflowers to decorate Gauguin's bedroom. These were to become iconic images considered among Vincent's signature images. This one is the first version of a series that he put together. He painted it in 1888, and it's entitled Sunflowers, as are all the rest in the series. It's oil on canvas, but he's experimenting a little because he's using, obviously, wet oil paint to paint, and then he's painting over and beside it with more wet oil paint. Simply said, he's not allowing the canvas to dry before he puts another color there. The result is he gets some blending of some colors, which is quite unusual and quite nice. He painted 5 large canvases with sunflowers in a vase while he lived in Arles. Each one is slightly different. He painted still life studies of flowers after seeing the way the French Impressionists in Paris were using color. Their work with color inspired him to incorporate more color in his art. So did that Japanese art. While in his early still life studies of flowers were pretty traditional in their colors, toward the end of his career, he uses very striking color contrasts. This is a painting he did of his bedroom in his home in Arles, which he called the Yellow House. It was painted yellow. Yellow was Vincent's favorite color. He painted this one in 1888, and you can see something of the sparsity of his life. But if you look very carefully, there are two portraits on the wall above his bed, and one of them is of his beloved mother. Near the end of 1888, Vincent began having episodes that are linked today to the mental illness that finally overwhelmed him. In one particular incident, he got into a violent argument with Gauguin. That argument ended with Gauguin moving back to Paris and Vincent having only one part of an ear. There's disagreement among the scholars as to how Vincent lost that part of his ear. Some say Gauguin cut it off during that argument, and the two decided not to tell so they could spare Gauguin from the police. Others are convinced that Vincent cut it off himself. We'll never know for sure. After this, Vincent decided that he was no longer capable of handling or caring for himself, so he checked himself into an asylum for rest and care. After this, his painting increased exponentially. His output was amazing. Ironically, one of his most famous and easily recognized paintings was painted while he was in the asylum. You see it behind me, and you see it on your screen. It's called The Starry Night. He painted it in June of 1889. He painted it in Provence, where he was in the asylum. It's his imagined view out his window at the asylum. It's not the actual picture of what his window showed him. It's also not the only starry night he ever painted. He had painted at least one beforehand, the Starry Night over the Rhone. But it was not like this one. This one is exquisite. This one is different. Today, its value is estimated at $100 million. There are others who suggest, since it'll never be sold, it's in a permanent collection, they're suggesting that it's actually worth perhaps $1 billion because of its uniqueness. It's unique in terms of the paint strokes. It's unique in terms of the way the picture comes to life. He has the moon, bright yellow. He has the stars. He has the sky in waves. Very mobile, very motion involved. And then he has the little village in Arles, painted down below. You basically miss it when you're first looking at the painting. But there's the church steeple, which is the most important figure in the village, and then some other little towns or little houses. And then behind it, you see what must be a bit of a forest. This is out of his imagination. This is not what he saw with his eyes. This is what he saw with his mind. It's been part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City since 1941. It was acquired through a bequest. It's described as a touchstone of modern art. It's his most popular painting, and it's the one considered by most to be probably the most influential piece of art in history. It literally changed the way we view art and the way artists view and create their art. In a publication that the MoMA Highlights put out in 2019, this was written, quote, Van Gogh assigned an emotional language to night and nature that took them far from their actual appearances. Dominated by vivid blues and yellows applied with gestural verb and immediacy, the Starry Night also demonstrates how inseparable Van Gogh's vision was from the new procedures of painting that he was devising, in which color and paint describe a world outside the artwork, even as they telegraph their own status as merely color and paint. In other words, he's painting his emotions, his feelings, not what he's actually seeing. He said this, "I often think that the night is more alive and more richly colored than the day." At the asylum, Vincent was allowed more freedoms than most. He could leave the hospital grounds so long as an attendant was with him. He was allowed to paint. In fact, they even provided him his own studio. He could read and stay in his room as much as he chose. There he was diagnosed as an epileptic with occasional bouts of depression and paranoia accompanied by hallucinations. Van Gogh said, "Paintings have a life of their own that derives from the painter's soul." Just 13 months after Vincent had painted The Starry Night, he died from a gunshot wound. The following day, he was buried in a small village in France that he had moved to when he left the asylum in Provence. He moved there to be closer to his brother Theo, who himself was not well. The funeral was private. His brother Theo conducted the service. Vincent's coffin was covered in sunflowers, brought to the funeral by family members, friends from Paris, and villagers who had known him. 6 months later, Theo died and was buried next to his brother. What happened to the rest of Vincent's siblings? He had 3 sisters, Anna, Elizabeth, and Wilhelmina. Anna, after their father died, spent the rest of her life in relative poverty. She had a very strong disagreement with Vincent, an argument after their father died, and many scholars suggest that that argument was the turning point in Vincent's life in his attitude toward family, the other family other than Theo. It caused him to leave the Netherlands, his beloved home country, and he never returned. Elizabeth, like Anna, had a hard life, a lot of poverty in there after the father had died. She had a number of Vincent's paintings, and so she ultimately was able to sell some of those in order to support her family and herself. She also was a writer. She wrote and published several books, including one about Vincent, which I have not been able to find a copy of anywhere. Cornelius, the youngest boy in the family, he worked on the railroad from Pretoria to Mozambique and in the gold mines of South Africa. While there, he became involved with the Boer War, and he joined that fight as an ambulance driver. He was captured by the British, and he was a POW for a period, and he died in a field hospital in 1900. Wilhelmina, I think, is one of the most interesting ones of the siblings to me. She traveled widely when she was young. She was looking for a position. She wanted to be a nurse or a teacher or a governess, and periodically she would get positions to do that. She was very fascinated by the very earliest feminist movement that was overtaking Paris at the turn of the century. She even visited Edgar Degas' studio with her brother Theo. She never married. She lived with her mother until the mother died. She was especially close to Vincent and corresponded with him as Theo did, but not as much, especially during the final year of Vincent's life when he was living in the asylum. She herself was institutionalized in 1902. In the institution, Wilhelmina refused to go for walks outside of the asylum, and this is a break from the family pattern. You remember when they were children, the family, all the Van Goghs would get together, they'd walk through their home village and sometimes out into nature beyond it. She refused to do walks. She sewed some, and mostly she read. Novel reader, this portrait by Vincent is believed by many scholars to be a study of his sister Wilhelmina. Vincent gave paintings to his family, 17 of which were sold after his death to pay for Wilhelmina's medical care. And then there's Theo. Clearly, without Theo, we would have no Vincent van Gogh, or at least we'd have no paintings of Vincent's. He did become the prominent art dealer that the family had believed Vincent would become. He was successful enough to support himself and Vincent. And as that financial support, he and Vincent were extraordinarily close. They maintained a steady and very robust letter exchange during Vincent's life. And those letters, there are hundreds of them, have provided scholars with neat insights into what their relationship with each other was like and what Vincent's private life was like, because Vincent spilled out everything to his brother Theo. And then he died 6 months after Vincent's death. So ironically, he too did not live to see how important Van Gogh would become as an artist, even though it was his money that made it possible. This, I think, is the saddest painting that I've ever seen that Vincent van Gogh painted. It's called Sorrowing Old Man at Eternity's Gate. He painted it in 1890. It's one of his final paintings. It's oil on canvas. At the time of his death, Vincent was convinced that he was a failure as a man and a failure as an artist. When he died, his brother Theo was his primary heir. He got everything that Vincent had, which mostly were paintings, many canvases and drawings. After Theo's death, 6 months later, then Theo's widow inherited everything, including that collection of paintings. Their son, Vincent Willem van Gogh, eventually inherited the collection, and he played a key role in establishing the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, which is where you can go and see every kind of thing that Vincent ever did. It's magnificent. He didn't see his enormous success, Vincent, but he was no failure. This is the most recent information I could get, March of 2025, of the 10 most expensive Van Gogh paintings that have sold at auction. Remember, these are auction paintings. They are not paintings that are acquired through private buyers. Sunflowers sold for $40 million in 1987. Today, with inflation, that value would be $110 million. Orchard with cypresses, $117 million in 2022. Portrait of Dr. Paul Gachet, $83 million in 1990, valued at $200 million today. Gachet was the physician who took care of Vincent at the asylum, so he was very important to him. Laborer in a Field, which goes back to the peasant days, sold for $81 million in 2017. Self-Portrait Without a Beard, $72 million in 1998, estimated today at $140 million. Wooden Cabins Among the Olive Trees and Cypresses, $71 million in 2021. The Avenue of Les Champs, $66 million in 2015. Poppies and Daisies, $62 million in 2014. Irises, $54 million in 1987. Estimated value, $150 million with inflation. Landscape Under Stormy Sky, $54 million in 2015. And Fields Near Les Fields, $52 million in 2022. Vincent was no failure, but Vincent never knew, nor did Theo, nor did his mother and father. Vincent van Gogh didn't start painting until he was 27 years old. He died at 37. He never received any formal training as an artist. He was in an art academy at Antwerp for 3 months, but he wasn't doing much serious work. He began as a follower of realism, but he ended as the artist most scholars say helped define post-impressionism. In the 10 years that he created art, he produced over 900 paintings, plus even more drawings and sketchings. They figured it mathematically that he was, during this 10-year period, he was averaging a new piece of art every 36 hours. Now, of course, he didn't just do that all the time. And there were periods when he would paint furiously and do 3 or 4 canvases in a day. There were other periods when he would just draw and think. A dedicated letter writer, he often included preliminary sketches of his work in his letters, particularly to Theo. And so there's a preliminary sketch of the Starry Night that he sent to his brother. He painted over his own art so he could save money on buying canvases. He said, "I'm always doing what I cannot do yet in order to learn how to do it." This may be the single biggest clue to the learning disability, because he had to learn by doing and by teaching himself and by practicing rather than taking classes and studying. There's no question Van Gogh is a master. He was a troubled man. He had comfort and torture at every encounter. Things were never great for him, enough so that he did die convinced he was a failure. But he left us an incredible treasure trove of art that the world will not soon forget.